Word problems. The very phrase strikes fear into the heart of many test takers. But fear not. Very often, on a test like the high set, the word problems involve the easiest math on the entire test. The trick is just to read carefully and pay attention to detail. Here is a fascinating problem from the world of pets. Take just a second and pause the video and read this problem. Which brings us to step 1. Read the entire problem. Very often students will start out reading carefully. Paul bought 10 packages of cat food and 8 packages of dog food, but then the mind wanders. Each package of do-wah-diddy-diddy-dum, 10 cans, 4 cans, there's some cans, and they don't end up having really any idea what this problem is asking. So read the entire problem carefully. In fact, read it about 48 or 49 times. And if you can't manage that, at least 2 or 3 times. The second step, before you really start doing any math at all, is to identify the actual question being asked. A lot of the word problem is going to be just information. At some point, it's going to ask you a specific question. You want to make sure to use that question to guide you in the various steps you're going to have to perform to figure it out. So in this case, the question part of the question is simply, how many more cans of cat food than dog food did Paul buy? And it's just, I guess by this point it's not surprising to me how often students will just do stuff to numbers. Maybe they'll figure out how many cans of dog food there are and how many cans of cat food. Maybe they'll just add those up and come up with a total number of cans. That's great if you got nothing else to do, but the problem says how many more cans of cat food than dog food did Paul buy? So we're going to have to compare those two amounts. We're going to have to find the number of cans, and we're going to have to compare the dog food and the cat food cans and see how many more we've got. The next step is to write down all of the information from the problem. Pull the numbers and the labels out of the problem so that you can more easily see what's going on. So here we have cats. Well, we have cat food and dog food, and let's see, we've got 10 packages of cat food, 8 packages, and I'm just abbreviating in a way that makes sense to me. It doesn't really matter how you abbreviate it. Let's see, we're going to have 10 cans per pack with our cat food and only 4 cans per pack with the dog food. So there's the information laid out, and once you have it laid out like that, you can make sure you're using all the information from the problem. You're almost always going to need all of the numbers in the problem to get to the answer, unless it's one of those questions where you have information and 2 or more questions are being asked based on that information. So if you solve the problem and realize you've left some number out, then you might want to look at the problem again just to make sure you've done everything you need to do. All right, the next step, let's do the math. We have to decide on the operation for each step. And remember, there might be steps further along the way that depend on information you're getting on the early steps. So once you have the new information from your first steps, you can use that information to decide on the operations for the subsequent steps. So what operation are we going to perform here? I'm just keeping the information for dogs in this spot just so that we have room to do our work. And this problem isn't really difficult, but I want to show you kind of how you can think through a problem when you're not exactly sure how to do it. So in this case, We know how many packages of dog food we have. We know how many cans are in a pack, and you could probably figure out that we needed to multiply, but let's just pretend like you couldn't. You could kind of just literally draw the thing like a picture. I'm not great with drawing, but there's a package of dog food. And I have 8 of those, so I'm going to go ahead and draw 8, but you know what? If it were a larger number, like 800, I'm not going to draw 800 boxes, but as I start to go through this process, it will let me figure out what math I need to do. I'm not going to draw 4 cans in each. I'm just going to draw the number 4. And very quickly I see I've got 4 cans per package, so I'm just going to keep adding 4s until I've used up all the packages. There are 8 packages, so I could in fact do 4 plus 4 plus 4 8 times, but hopefully you recognize that our math shortcut for that is 8 times 4. And that equals 32. So we've figured out what to do, and we've gotten an answer for this particular step. So now that we've decided on the operations, and right here you can see I carried this over from the last little section there, we can use that same operation to figure out the next piece we need. That's the number of cans of cat food. And then we have to figure out, now that we have these 2 pieces of information, have we solved the problem? Well, no, it wants to know how many more cans of cat food there are than dog food. And you can see there are more cans of cat food than dog food. How many more is a subtraction problem. We're trying to find the difference between 100 and 32. That's subtraction, is how we figure out how many more of one thing there are than another. Let the calculator do the work for you. You could do it by hand, you could do it in your head, but you're more likely to make a mistake. So let the calculator do that. And just notice that answer choices that you might be tempted to get will be in the multiple choice. So for example, if you saw this 100 here and this 32, and you might notice 132 in the answer choices, which is what you would get if you added those 2 numbers. Well, that's not the answer to the problem, but it's specifically there to confuse you. So just make sure that you're doing the operation that you decided on and it makes sense. Our last step is to make sure our answer makes common sense. We identified the problem's actual question, how many more cans of cat food, so that kept us from doing things like trying to add the 2 numbers. We had to subtract, and 68 seems like a reasonable answer. If I just took 32 and sort of rounded it down to 30, which is a nearby number that's easier to work with, I can tell that there's a difference of 70 between 30 and 100. That's something I can do in my head, so when I went to the calculator and got 68, this answer makes some common sense. It seems reasonable to me that that's how many more cans of cat food we'd have than dog food. So there you have it. We've done the problem, we've used common sense to check our answer, and now we can move on to the next problem on the test. So those are the basic steps for working with multiple step word problems. Don't let the problem intimidate you. Just because you can't see all the steps immediately doesn't mean you can't solve the problem. Take your time, read it carefully, write down the information, solve the pieces that you can solve, and as you do that, the later steps will sort of open up to you and will become more clear. Finally, don't move on to the next problem on the test without checking your answer and making sure that it makes common sense.